Cliff, how are
I'm not sure we got that.
you? Are we on?
We are.
Good.
Bloop is real.
What time is it over there?
Good question. 2 p.m.
And what year is that, Cliff?
I think I think it's 2040. It
Yeah,
feels like we're living in an
you're
apocalyptic
ahead of us
future.
or behind us.
What's that?
I'm never sure if New Zealand's ahead of us or behind us.
We're ahead, mate. The future, in the next 2 hours, things get really weird.
Right, okay. Well, you're actually ahead of us in many respects. You've got quite the Prime Minister there, hey?
I think,
Not
yeah, I mean, I
not-
think that we've done a really good job till now. I don't think any country's handled it perfectly, and there's a lot that needs to be done going forward. Obviously, there's a lot of debate now about how we can actually work with this, move forward, not have economies collapse, and also prepare for this happening again. I mean, I think we've known for literally decades that there is going to be a pandemic, so it was never this could happen. This is going to happen. So how do we prepare? And I think that it's showing that a lot of governments weren't really prepared for this because everyone's scrambling now to figure out the best course of action.
Yeah, it's funny. In that book that you recommended me, the Dave Sinclair Lifespan book, I don't know whether you recall because you read it a few months back, but there's actually a couple of pages that he actually talks about the threat of what we're actually experiencing right now is that there will be at some point this virus that affects the globe and impacts economies right across the globe, and we need to kind of safeguard ourselves as much as we can because it's sort of inevitable and it will happen, not if it happens, sort of thing.
Yeah, and that's where I think people have had a bit of a disconnect. They've sort of thought, well, this could happen, but no one was really thinking this will happen. It's going to happen. There is absolutely no doubt that there will be pandemic illnesses. There have been pandemic illnesses. The 1918 flu virus, the H1N1, that killed more people than World War One.
Yeah.
According to some estimates, it killed more people than both World War One and World War Two
Yeah.
combined.
That's crazy.
It's crazy. And now we're obviously better prepared because we have a better, overall better health system, better levels of development. We've got better, testing, diagnostics, tracing, all that kind of stuff. But we also have a truckload more travel. And I wonder what implications this is going to have for us socially. Like, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think people will travel less? Do you think people will change their social habits?
I think certainly sort of short term after let's assume everything returns to normal in 6 months. I think there'll be a reaction, a very sort of cautious reaction for the next however long, maybe going into years, that people will be very sort of cautious as to traveling with or being around large groups of people. I think it even might shape the nature in which we meet and greet people. It's hard to know right now how it's going to impact and what the ramifications are, but I think people are going to become more cautious. I don't know whether that will stick around for the rest of time, but I was actually talking to Teal last night about how quite amazing and staggering it is that on the whole, with a few sort of exceptions, on the whole, everyone has just conformed and resigned to this kind of home isolation protocol. Yeah. If you'd sort of projected, 6 months ago that we'd all be sort of told to stay in home and home isolated, everyone would be like, go fuck yourself. That'd never happen. Like, there'd be too many people pushing against that. But, as I say, aside from a few exceptions, everyone is just doing what, they've been told to do. It's quite
And how strict is it there? Are you locked into your homes? Well, not locked into your homes, but are you pretty much stuck at home, or can you do limited things? Like what's the extent of it there?
We are, it's okay to leave the house for, uh, you know, if you want to go to the pharmacy or the grocery or the sort of essential trips.
Yeah.
You can exercise, I think, in company, like one other. You can walk your dog, walk your kid or whatever. But yeah, I mean, it's not, they haven't gone to the lengths of a lockdown. So there's not sort of patrols that are you know, monitoring this stuff. It's all sort of suggestive. But on the whole, like, the beaches are starting to be closed. Tashi and my son, went for a surf, or tried to go for a surf about a week ago, and we got to the beach and they turned us around. So I think sort of, yeah, it's not like the UK where it's been enforced that you're in lockdown, but you kind of almost well as maybe, you know.
Yeah.
What are you guys doing?
Pretty much the same, where, you know, there's a strict, well, it's not an advisory, it's a sort of strict situation in which we have to stay home. There's, you know, you can same thing, you can leave your house basically to go to the supermarket, dairy, pharmacy, that's it. Or if you're involved in an essential business, and you can go for a walk, and they suggest sort of one walk a day to go out and get some fresh air, but you've got to keep, you know, 2 meters plus from any other person, and you can't congregate, you can't stop, you know, you basically just got to go out for a walk, and that's it. And they are starting to enforce that quite strictly. So I know that if people are gathering, or if people aren't, you know, going by the rules there, I think there have been some arrests. I'm not sure, but they're certainly, you know, stopping people if they think they might be driving somewhere that's not essential.
Right.
So it's pretty full on. And I think obviously it's necessary right now. One of the things that I'm grappling with, and one of the things that I think people need to be discussing, is what does this mean in the medium to long term? So, you know, at what point do we start to relax restriction, for two reasons really: so that we don't have a massive economic collapse, and also so that we can actually allow, if there is conferred immunity from having caught this thing, that we can then allow basically those who are well enough to probably not experience symptoms to basically catch it at a very slow rate. I know this sounds really bad, but catch it at a really slow rate to get that herd immunity, so that then there's not a second spike. Because if you just lock it down and you pretty much stop transmission, I know that's almost impossible, but let's say you could stop transmission, but there are still some carriers when you relax restrictions, you could have a big surge, right? And that's the danger, as everyone knows, is it's not so much the mortality per se, although that's obviously devastating for the people involved. It's more so that if we have that big surge, there's going to be a massive impact on the hospital systems, and that's going to lead to healthcare collapse, which could lead to economic calamity. You know, all those sorts of things spring from it. But a lot of my colleagues now are starting to talk about, well, we're probably on the right track now, but what do we do going forward so that we don't create longer term economic and social damage that could actually result in poorer health outcomes in the long term? Because, you know, if we create a whole bunch of poverty, we know that worsens people's health outcomes. You know, we know that there'll be a skyrocketing in diabetes and heart disease and all these various things that are associated with living, you know, in a state of poverty.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess taking a positive sort of from this, that there will be, and you can almost start to see it happening, there will be innovation occur as a direct result of what we're experiencing. You know, I've seen it from a company sort of being nimble and sort of twisting and creating something completely different to what they currently have, or a morphed version of that. And also new businesses that are, I mean, what we're on now, this platform, Zoom, they'd be fucking sky high right now, wouldn't they?
Well, Bella told me one day, I think it was last week or the previous, one of the last 2 weeks, in one day, there were 600,000 downloads of Zoom.
Yeah, right.
One day. Like that's massive.
Yeah, nuts.
And I think, it's interesting. I was talking to my my colleagues at Newzest just before all this went down, and we had already gone remote, right? Because my companies are mostly remote anyway. So we all work in, different places. My our member support person for HPN lives in the States, and Bella and I are here in Auckland, and we've got other contributors who are around and about. So we're basically remote anyway. But it was interesting with Newzest that, Newzest New Zealand, they were talking about going remote and then using this as an opportunity to also see how that might positively impact our staff, right? Being able to work more from home, not necessarily having to go into the office. And I know that a lot of businesses are looking at that as it's almost like an exercise right now and seeing what can be done, because maybe we don't need as much infrastructure. Maybe we don't need all the big buildings and offices and stuff like that.
It's a bit of an archaic system, like sort of that we sort of inherited from decades, where the infrastructure was such that you had to be in the same building at the same time, but we don't live by those rules necessarily anymore.
No. And I think we need some aspect of community, and we need to be together actually face to face at times. But maybe there's a balance there. Maybe we can do, a lot more work from home. Maybe we can meet up in a shared space, 2 days a week or whatever it happens to be, and just find different ways to work with this. So I agree with you. There's some interesting opportunities that could come out of it.
Yeah.
There's also potentially some worrying things that probably won't occur. But I was talking about this with a friend the other day. I'm really thankful that we live in a country that is, considered one of the least corrupt in the world. We have overall a pretty good police force and government. We're, very democratic, fairly progressive socially, all that kind of stuff. Because I wonder, in countries where that's not the case, how an increase in, I guess, government control could lead to some pretty heavy shit going down.
Like less freedom.
Yeah.
Sort of thing.
Yeah, under the guise of, we're doing this for your own good. But
yeah, I was talking to Till about that. It's kind of it is an opportunity if your mind allows yourself to think this way, that it could be an opportunity for the state to kind of, it's almost like they've got you now. They're controlling the flow of support, finance.
Yeah.
I don't know whether.
And it's probably not, it's probably not going to be something that actually impacts us, because we generally have pretty good faith in our governments. And I do have, a lot of faith in our democratic systems and the way that things work. But I think when you start to talk about these types of issues, people can immediately say, oh, you're just being a conspiracy theorist, or, you're sort of...
That's why I stopped myself.
Exactly. Or you're neglecting the actual issue at hand, which is that we have a pandemic. But, most people who are discussing these issues sensibly, they're not ignoring the problem. The problem obviously is that we can't let this thing get a hold whereby it basically destroys our health system, straight up. But I think we would also be remiss if we didn't look at the way society works and maybe use this as an opportunity to try and make it better and to not fall into negative habits. All of us can remember what happened post 9/11. Governments, particularly the US government, did use that, and maybe they had best intentions. Maybe some people didn't. We just don't know. But there was certainly an increase in domestic surveillance, and that's well known. It's on the record. They were doing things that were illegal. They were spying on their own citizens. So, hey, as far as I know, no one's doing that as a result of this, but I don't see a problem with discussing these interesting social aspects, because hopefully these are ways that we can come out of this and make society better. I remember after the GFC, or during the sort of GFC immediately afterwards, I was based up in Canada, and I lost a lot of dough, as did a lot of other people. But one thing that I remember coming out of that positively was that a lot of people started to reassess how they were living because they simply didn't have the same amount of money they had previously. And I noticed people starting to reconnect with others, reconnecting with their family and their friends, and spending more time, I guess, doing things with people they loved rather than buying things that they thought would make them happy.
Mm.
I don't know whether that lasted, but it was a cool thing that I saw around me at least. And maybe people now will start to reassess where they're at as well.
Yeah, because you sort of touched on that in that presentation at Welfare, didn't you?
Yeah, and I think it's a really interesting thing to think about, because we get so tied up with the mechanics of what we're doing because we assume that achieving a certain arbitrary goal will make us happy. But if it's the wrong goal, it won't.
But that goal is just constantly, if you sort of got an appetite for it and you're ambitious, the goal just keeps, it's always at arm's length. There isn't some magical moment.
Exactly. It's the
moment. And I'm guilty of this, that I just feel if I do this, and this, then I'll get to this point where I can almost take the foot off the gas and reap the rewards of all the hard work that I've put in. But
yeah,
that's bullshit.
Yeah.
The goal just kind of slides as you slide.
Yeah, and that's where I think it's that constant reassessment of anyone's why, or even whys. Why do we do what we do? So in other words, what are the things we actually want to occur as a result of achieving this goal? It's certainly not that if you want to run a marathon, I mean, running a marathon is kind of neither here nor there. I don't think anyone would see that as an objectively desirable thing to do, to run 42 kilometers or whatever it is. But the things that they experience as a result of that, maybe the increased fitness, or the, getting back into shape, or feeling like they've really achieved something because that means something to them. I mean, all of these things are slightly different to the actual achievement of the goal per se. Mm. And I think sometimes we put so much on the goal that it can, in some respects, even drive negative outcomes. I remember when I won some weightlifting competitions. And after the one that I really wanted to win, I came home and I was depressed for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I was like, what am I going to do now?
What else is there? Well, I'm kind of guilty of a bit of that. And I'm experiencing that at the moment, is that in a bid to kind of attain this mystical, magical goal that, there's a part of my brain that knows that will never exist. I kind of stress my physiology to the point where I've gotten sick,
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm having to kind of wrestle with all that and realize that there is no end game, and can you take contentment and satisfaction from other things, or not hitting the bullseye every time? Because I've been workshopping this with a therapist this morning, just for transparency. The last sort of 7 or 8 years, what I've been doing in order to share my message is going against, like driving head on against myself. Myself as an individual is quite private. I know I was inherently shy as a kid. So in order to share your message as best you can, you have to tread over all that fear and go right up against it, overcome it, because you're going to be on camera, you're going to be presenting, you're going to do all these things that terrify the crap out of you.
Yeah.
But you're so passionate about your message, you want to do that.
Mm.
But what that does, and what that's done in my instance, it's caused 8 years of stress. It's called eight years of sort of not to suggest that I'm public speaking every day, but there's enough events and episodes within my calendar year that cause me enough stress that almost makes it chronic.
Yeah.
And that resulted in me getting shingles about 6 weeks ago. And like, as terrible as it was, and I'm still sort of, still sort of, it hasn't left my body completely. It gave me, it was a bit of a reset, not physically, but sort of mentally. It's like, well, what am I doing? Like, I'm just trying to attain the unattainable for what end? For being stressed all the time. And when I'm stressed, I'm distant. I sort of retreat within myself. And so I'm not a good partner. I'm not a good husband.
Mm.
And that's my world. Like, that's my family is my world. So if I'm not there and I'm not present, I'm not engaged, I'm not loving and all those things, then who am I serving? Like, so
Yeah.
I haven't, I think I need to, it's not to say that I can't still work with the intensity that I do, but I think I need to clearly manage the stress that comes with that. And like, that's the bit that I'm working on.
Yeah. I understand 100% because this year, I mean, I do a fair bit of speaking, and this year I had a lot booked in, and to be completely honest, they were really lucrative gigs as well. So
Yeah.
it was going to be, it's always a significant part of what we do business wise, or what I do business wise. And this year it was going to be especially so. And so there was, but basically when this all started, as you can imagine, every gig just started being cancelled through the year. The thing is, on the one hand, I was disappointed because I actually enjoy the feeling of, especially afterwards, of having done it and
Yeah.
hopefully influence someone, and you get that feedback where, I really enjoyed that. It's really cool. So that sort of drives me to some degree, and I really want to do a good job. But on the other hand, I was incredibly relieved because I think I had probably got to a point where there were almost too many gigs, too many big gigs, and I was really struggling to get through it
Right.
all. And so I was actually glad to have the break, to be honest.
Right.
And if some gigs came up, if some gigs come up next year, of course I'm going to take them, but I'm going to be circumspect about the gigs, how I feel about them, the topics I'm presenting, basically making sure that things are really in line with my ethos. Because
because this sort of, I'm always intrigued as to how it affects other people. I mean, public speaking it's not an uncommon thing, but I was around you the day that you spoke. I mean, we both spoke. You were the sort of keynote, so you came on at the end. I know for me, I can't be around anyone if I'm talking within, a couple of hours. I just want to be in a hotel room or at home or, away from it. But you have, and I was quite envious of this, you had this ability to socialize and come and see the other speakers. And I was like, he's got it down pat. He's able to walk through his day as normal and then just walk on stage kind of seemingly untouched by anxiety or nerves or.
I'm glad I present that facade because it's not 100% correct.
Right.
I think I have become more comfortable with that over the years, and I've put myself into situations purposefully where I haven't been able to have the isolation time, or maybe I haven't had the ability to prepare as much. One of the things that I try and do quite a lot, even if it's just with my students, is jump on and do lives and things like that, and do them without preparation. So it's just basically stream of consciousness to make sure that I can be just truly responsive in the moment. But no, I get really anxious before an event. I need to have time. Like, I'll shoot off without people noticing to my hotel room, and I'll have a lie down. I might do some meditation. I might, read through my talk and go through it in my head. I like to make sure I'm really well prepared, because that's the only way that I feel that I'll actually be comfortable up on stage. When I first started speaking, this is going back 20 odd years ago, I could literally, this is no bullshit, I couldn't eat for about 2 days before an event. I was so nervous and I wouldn't sleep. I'd just be so almost catatonically nervous leading up to it. And
by the time you got to the gig, you're wrecked, right?
yeah, and I would get up and do it, and it was, I think I was okay at it, and I got a lot better over the years. Certainly not claiming that I'm anything special now, but I think I've certainly improved over 20 odd years of speaking. But yeah, it's interesting because I don't know why I decided that I had to do it. It probably actually came from a lack of confidence and insecurity and wanting to prove myself that I got over that hurdle. But in many respects, I look back and think, I'm really surprised that I actually did it, given how it made me feel.
Yeah, or came back for more.
Yeah, exactly. Like, what's wrong with me?
I remember doing one at the MCA in Sydney, probably about 10 years ago, 8 years ago or something. Yeah, 150 people in the audience. And back then, in my mind, I thought if I take notes, or if I'm, even if I leave them at the lectern, or if I'm holding anything, that's very amateurish. But I was a fucking amateur, so I don't know what I was thinking. I was like, no, I just want to do it with no sort of no assistance. I do now. I'll take some notes, or the well-fed presentation was the first time I'd ever used PowerPoint, and wow. It's a million times easier, right?
Absolutely.
So back then, I had this 45-minute monologue in my head, like a rehearsed script.
Yeah.
So I started, probably got about 10 or 15 minutes into it, and then I just veered off track. Like, I'm talking verbatim, like recounting it verbatim. And I just veered off track, and I I didn't know how, because I was so rigid, I didn't know how to get back on. I couldn't remember what my next sort of line was. And then fear crept in. No, I didn't creep in, it just fucking catapulted in. And I did this thing called splitting. So part of your sort of fight or flight response, obviously I'm standing up in front of people, I'm not going to fight, I'm not going to run out the door, but your brain splits. And so your brain takes flight.
Yeah.
At that moment, I have no recollection what I'm saying, my train of thought, why I'm even standing up. I don't even know what the topic is. I'm just seeing all these faces staring back at me. And at that point, the guy who was sort of sharing the stage with me could see that I was just in this spiral and not able to kind of climb out. And he jumped in and spoke for the next 20 minutes, which left me on stage just flapping in the breeze, right? I'm just like, great, this is... But as horrendous as it was, it taught me that I never want that to happen again.
Yeah.
I did kinesiology. I went and saw a speaking coach. I did all the things I thought I needed to do to ensure that never happens again. Unfortunately, it hasn't. But I think largely that's to do with just doing it repeatedly.
Definitely.
And I think, like any craft, the more you do, the better you should get at it.
Yeah, a great word. I mean, it's a craft, and you become better at your craft. And any craft is really about marrying up the fundamental knowledge with technique, right? And I think the techniques that maybe people don't realize they're developing, they're critically important. Like the technique of storytelling. I know that I'm going to have stories that, to someone listening, they maybe think, oh, he's just, gone off on a tangent with the story. Well, no, I knew I was going to tell that story.
Yeah, right.
Or maybe I do go off on a tangent, but because I know what each block is that I'm talking about, I know that when I get back, I can loop back. Yeah. But I couldn't get up there and speak if I was relying on memorizing a speech. There is no way. It has to be a story that I'm telling.
Have you had any sort of royal fuck ups like the one I described?
I can't remember a particular instance, but there are a couple of times where I've given a really poor talk. And it's been under preparation, or it's been where someone's asked me to do a talk that I'm not really that happy about doing. I kind of do it, and you don't mean to, but maybe you under prepare, maybe you put things in a you organize it in a really poor order, and while you're up there you're thinking, what the fuck am I doing? This is stupid. I'm screwing this up. It's not fun for anyone.
No. Can I just start from the beginning, please?
Well, let's just can it. Let's just not do it. I got really good advice from Dr. Ian Brooks, though. He was New Zealand's biggest selling business author, and he's the father of my best friend. And so he was sort of a mentor growing up, and he was a very well-known public speaker. So he used to fly around the world giving talks about business. He was sort of known as the customer service, customer excellence sort of guy.
Right.
And he told me that he went to I think he was invited to speak at a conference in the States. If I get the story wrong, apologies, Ian, but I think it was a conference in the States, and he turned up to his session and there was one person in the audience. Oh. And you know what he did? He just went up there and tried to give the best speech he could possibly give.
Right.
Whereas most people would sort of say, oh, well, let's change this up a little bit. And have you got any questions or whatever, but he just said, no, I'm going to do this as if there were 1,000 people in the auditorium. I'm just going to get up and do it. And it plays into another quote I love is Henry Rollins says, nothing can go wrong up here. So when he's on stage, either speaking or performing with his band, his mindset is nothing can go wrong up here. Right. No matter what is actually going wrong.
Yeah.
The audience need to have a great experience. So the mics might be falling over and the place is falling down. He's doing his job. Doesn't matter about anything else.
Yeah, that's having one person in the audience is more terrifying to me than having 10,000. I prefer 10,000 than one.
No doubt. Especially if that person starts booing or something. Boo. Or if they fall asleep.
I've had that. I've had quite a bit of that.
I've had people fall asleep. I've had people who just look like they're disinterested. I've had people looking like they want to kill me. And in some cases, it's funny because, in some cases, that same person, I've been thinking, oh God, they hated it. They've come up afterwards and said, oh, I really enjoyed that. It's like, what's wrong with you there? Like, why do you look the way you look? Like, is that your normal face?
I kept getting, a couple of years ago, I seemed to do like a few and back to back. On each occasion, there'd be a guy. So for whatever reason, 90% of the people that come to my talks are female. And you get like a small handful.
Have you looked in the mirror?
Not this year. No, I don't think it's anything to do with that. I think it's just women tend to make decisions on health in the household. And
absolutely, yeah.
But thank you. And so I did about 3 or 4 in a row that the one or the two guys that would come would just sort of sit there and they don't want to make eye contact because, I've got this, you don't need to tell me what's going on. And so their heads aren't up. But then slowly over time, they just, I think they're on their phone under the table, but they're actually asleep. And so they must be in the front row. And so for the first couple, I just let it slide because, I don't want to make an awkward moment of the thing. And he might be genuinely exhausted by his day,
Yeah.
But it was actually so, you've got that sort of dialogue now in your head. You've got that narrative. While you're speaking your presentation, you got this inner voice saying, this is boring as batshit. This guy's asleep. You need to sort this out. Yeah. So anyway, on the third occasion, I just pulled him up. I said, sorry, sir. Sorry, you seem to have fallen asleep. If you wouldn't mind just either staying awake or fucking off, it's very off-putting. And it is. It's disrespectful. Anyway, I sat quite far up the back during your talk where the lights were quite dim, so you probably didn't notice that I had 40 wings, but get that opportunity.
Hey, well, I figure I get paid relatively well for speaking. So if someone wants to pay and go to sleep, that's fine. It's probably cheaper to get a cheap motel room.
Yeah.
But, whatever floats people's boat, maybe that's their thing. I'm not going to get in the way of what your fetish is to go and
Could be.
what sleep in an audience.
Yeah. Hey, just on you a little bit, Cliff. You grew up in Auckland. What was your or did you grow up in Auckland?
Yeah, I did. I grew up on the North Shore of Auckland.
Yeah, right. What was Cliff like as a kid? A little less beard, maybe.
Yeah. I think on the whole, I was a pretty easy kid, to be honest. It's weird because a lot of the things that I now, well, maybe not right now, but some of the things I struggled with a lot through, say, my 20s and 30s are quite opposite to how I was when I was a kid. Like I used to sleep anywhere, sleep right through the night. I'm still an early riser, but I'd wake up really early, and I was just a very normal kid, I think.
Nice.
Except for the fact that I think I did get into a few interesting things quite early in life. I saw my old man, who was he was running marathons at the time. He got into yoga when I was really young, like about 3 years old, for flexibility, but he didn't realize there was a lot more to it. And then he did realize there was a lot more to it. He got quite into yoga. And so I used to basically mimic what he was doing when he was doing yoga in the living room. So I got into yoga when I was really young, developed a bit of an interest through the books that he had on yoga and Eastern philosophy. And so my mum, who was a devout Christian actually, but she hadn't brought us up in the tradition because she figured that if we wanted to, we would. If we didn't want to and wanted to follow another path, that was fine. So she was very non-conversional. She bought me my first books on Buddhism and Hinduism and all sorts of stuff. And I really got into that. I would have been, by that stage, I would have had an interest in it for a while, but I probably started getting my first books probably in my early teens, sort of 12, 13.
And none of your peers are doing this, or I'm assuming?
They thought it was really weird because by the time I guess I was about 15 or 16, I was a practicing Buddhist and, was so for a long time through to my probably mid-20s. And it's not that I'm not now. I just don't really have a, tradition that I follow per se. And so, yeah.
In the whole Nam Your Horing Gegior and...
What's that?
My best mate growing up his mum and dad were Buddhists.
Oh, yeah?
And they had like a little shrine in their living room, and then twice a day would come, burn incense, and there's this chant, Nam Your Horing Gegior. I don't know whether that has anything to do with anything, but that's what I mean.
Very diverse sort of, I wouldn't even call it a religion, very diverse philosophy because it's really tempered by the locale. So, you might be brought up in a tradition that's, from Vietnam or from, China or Northern India or whatever, and they're all going to be very different because they often take on the local deities.
Right.
But in Buddhism, there's no God per se. It's not that they say there's no God or there is a God. It's just that that's not actually the imperative thing. The imperative thing is how we're living now, and I guess the things we're doing to recognize the human condition. So my approach was always very much what you'd probably call a sort of probably a very Western sort of, for lack of a better term, non-dogmatic form. And I was probably most attracted to sort of the teachings, sort of the teachings that come through Chan and Zen Buddhism, which is typically not very dogmatic. It's more just about the practice. It's about doing the meditation. You're sitting, mindfulness of breath, that kind of stuff.
You're right.
But yeah, I mean, I was very, I guess I thought about a lot of things that maybe my peers weren't thinking about so much. That drove me to have a lot of frustration and discontentment.
With society or with your friends or?
Yeah, no, not with my friends. I'm actually still, all my good buddies, we're still best mates now, having met in kindergarten. So we're going on, 40 odd years. And we still catch up all the time. We've got at the moment, because we're all obviously around the world in different places, we've got a little Zoom meetup that we're doing every Friday to have a beer.
Yeah.
It's cool stuff. But yeah, no, it was more frustration with just the world as it stands. And, that led to, through a circuitous a bunch of circuitous events to me being kicked out of high school. And then much later, well, not much later, the following year, I was kicked out of university and all sorts, and eventually came back.
So you're a violent, aggressive Buddhist, were you?
I certainly wasn't violent or aggressive.
What were you doing to get kicked out?
I got kicked out of school for wearing a skirt.
Yeah, right. So nothing to do with your philosophy?
No, nothing at all. No, I was sort of a nonconformist, and I didn't suffer fools gladly. You know, I had a teacher, my French teacher used to say, if I was sort of drifting off, he'd say, "Oh, would you rather be running around the field?" Like, yeah, I would. So I'd say, "Oh, well, off you go." So I'd run around the field, and my science teacher one year said, "Oh, do you even like being in my class?" And I said, "Not really," because I was just being honest. And he said, "Oh, well, you don't come back."
Yeah, right. And then,
so he wouldn't let me in the class. So I basically didn't go for an entire year, I didn't go to science class.
So you'd have those hours just kind of walking the corridors?
Oh, just hang out, yeah, outside. I'd kick a footy, kick a football around and have a bit of fun, go and shoot some hoops. Basically what I did. And then, at the end of the year, I think I didn't ace it, but I came pretty damn close to acing the exam. Just
the
thought,
science?
Yeah, and thought, well, fuck you. Just do it.
So were you reading the textbooks out of class?
I don't
the teacher, not the subject, right?
Yeah, I don't remember specifically. I certainly didn't specifically learn for it, but I read a lot growing up anyway. So I had already read a lot of books, and I was interested in things. So I would read books about science anyway. So I guess I just absorbed a lot of knowledge just because I was interested in things. I wasn't interested in conforming to a way of doing things, particularly when someone was a dick. But I like concepts, right? So I'd just read about interesting stuff and absorb it. And yeah, didn't seem to have too much trouble with that side of things. I had more trouble with arbitrary authority and what I saw as being sort of injustice. So yeah, getting kicked out certainly wasn't a big protest. What basically happened was I was also, despite all that other weirdness going on, I was the captain of our high school first 15, right? So in New Zealand, obviously rugby's like a religion. I was the captain of the first 15, so that's a pretty big honor. And we didn't have to wear a uniform in our final year of high school. And so they would occasionally have these days where the rest of the school could come in mufti, not in uniform.
Oh, so just the team didn't have to wear?
No, in the final year, so seventh form,
right,
which is now year 13 or whatever they call it, didn't have to wear a uniform at the time. They do now because of what we did. But the rest of the school had to wear a uniform. There were certain days where you didn't have to wear a uniform, and you basically donate to charity, right? So you'd bring $2 or whatever, and that would go to charity, and you could not wear a uniform. So on that one of those days, because we didn't wear a uniform anyway, I said to the guys in the first 15, well, why don't we make a bit of fun for the younger kids and whatnot? We'll come along, and because we're supposed to be the jocks of the school, we'll wear skirts.
Right.
That seems a bit of fun. So we all turned up wearing skirts, and the powers that be at the school hit the roof.
Right.
There was a lot of old wowsers. I'd say they're pretty, homophobic, and they were worried that we were actually, that we were cross-dressing legitimately. Right. If we were, that should have been great as well, but they didn't see it that way. And so, they basically said, well, you can either get into, normal clothes, quote unquote, or you can go home. So I said, I'll take the second option. Thanks. I'm off. So I jumped in my car and went home. And I was sitting at home stewing about it, thinking, that's not right. You can't really send someone home for wearing a skirt.
Yeah.
So I called up Youth Line, which was like a youth law service, and said, I've been sent home. And they said, why? And I said, I was wearing a skirt. And they said, is there any rule against wearing skirts? And I said, no. And they said, and the women in your form, the girls in your form can wear skirts? Like, yeah. And they said, well, they can't do that. You can go back.
Yeah. Right.
And they said that they wouldn't recommend this, but you can go back wearing the skirt. So what did I do?
Oh, I reckon you would have gone back wearing a skirt.
Yeah.
And a blouse, probably.
Yeah. And so, long story short,
a collective with the other players, or just you on your own?
It was just me. I think no one else wanted to rock the boat. Too much to lose. But I thought, bugger it, I'll go back. I'd kind of I wasn't too concerned. If they kicked me out, they kicked me out. They did eventually kick me out, which was highly illegal.
Because of that. So you got expelled because of that.
They couldn't expel me because when you expel a student, it's actually quite a big deal. You need to go through a process, and it gets sent down to the Ministry of Education, and they need to confirm it and stuff, because you're taking education away from someone, which is a pretty big deal. They couldn't do that, so they just basically asked me not to come back. But
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, but what then happened was the coaches of the first 15 said, we need Cliff to play footy.
Can he come back on training days?
Well, pretty much that's what happened. They said, can he stay until the end of the rugby season?
Yeah, stay on the books.
Yeah, and they said, that's fine, but we don't want him going to class. So I'd basically go into school for training and to help train little kids how to play footy, and that was the rest of my year.
Wow. So that's like the last 6 months or something.
Yeah.
And then you had exams at the end of that.
And I was gone.
Oh.
I was out. They didn't want me there. So I had basically done...
You left school with no qualifications?
Well, I had done what we call sixth form certificate, which was the year before.
Right.
And because I was pretty smart, I had actually done quite a lot of what we called bursary at the time, which was our seventh form, our final qualification. I'd done a bit of that beforehand. So I'd already done bursary English, and I think I'd done bursary mathematics and maybe some bursary sciences or something. So I'd pretty much done a lot of it anyway. Right. So I could, at that stage, I could go on and I could study the following year. So I studied at AUT the next year.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that wouldn't happen these days, would it?
Oh, no. It would be, I was talking about that with, I actually went out with one of our teachers from school, has become quite a good friend subsequently. She was quite a young teacher. Her husband was also a teacher at school, and they were quite young relatively. And so we became quite good friends, and we're still very good friends now. And we went out a few weeks back now, just before the lockdown. One of my buddies is in a band. He was back touring, and so we went to see him play. And they said it's interesting because those things that were so big back then would just be nothing now.
No. Yeah. They wouldn't. They wouldn't even want to raise an eyebrow, would they? You know, like, yeah, it's a different landscape.
And rightly so. I think, we had a lot of really negative gender stereotypes stuff around. And I think hopefully it's getting to a point now where, like, there are always going to be differences based on biological sex. I firmly believe that. But at the same time, there's also a huge interplay between that and what we socially condition as being like gender norms. And that plays into a lot of different stuff. Mm. And I think, if someone wants to wear, because I also used to wear skirts socially as well, but that was different. That wasn't at school. That was just because if I saw a cool skirt and I wanted to wear it, I'd wear it. You are obviously friends with me on Facebook. My profile picture is me basically wearing a skirt.
Yeah.
Next to Bella at a wedding.
And when I saw that, when we first became friends, I thought it was a fucking great look. It's such a, and I've always thought, probably since David Beckham, probably 20 years ago, wore a sarong, and he was blasted all over the media. And I was like, he looks fucking cool, but it's just. Yeah, it's a different landscape now, thankfully.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have kids, obviously. You do, I don't. Bella and I have sort of talked about if and when we have kids, then we don't want to sort of create those archetypes that people have to conform to. If we had a son and he wants to wear a skirt, cool. If we have a daughter and she wants to do whatever, that's completely cool. Yeah. Because, hey, I mean, it's those things are not what is conditioned within us biologically.
Yeah.
That stuff's the social stuff. And I think if we start to, put people into boxes because of that, that's when we start to see that bigotry and, that kind of stuff rises.
Yeah. So then you went to, now you're at uni.
Yeah, then I'm at uni, and that was a whole different sort of situation where I started to see some flaws in what we were being taught. it didn't make sense. We were being taught certain things about the roles of macronutrients, protein, carbohydrates, fat, and what their roles were in the human body. And then we're told something that seemed to be quite an opposition to that at our nutrition classes. Nutrition classes would basically say you've got to prescribe, let's say 65% plus calories from carbohydrate. And I'd sort of start doing the math, as I'm starting to work with clients as a student practitioner and whatnot. And if I gave people all that carbohydrate, there wouldn't be enough to optimize their protein and fat intake. And so there was this disconnect. And so I was also at the time doing a lot of reading, I was doing a lot of sort of self-directed learning, and a lot of the research that was coming out was quite in opposition to what we were learning. So I would just ask questions. I wasn't really saying, you're wrong. What I was saying is, hey, what about this? And eventually it just became too frustrating for the lecturers, and they said, go and see the dean. And the dean said, you've done enough to pass, but don't go back. Right. So I spent a bit of time surfing and training.
Playing people, shooting hoops.
Yeah, exactly. It's like high school all over again. Yeah, I think I should have become a better basketball player with all that spare time, but
practice. So then, well, it's a good job you're as smart as you are, or else you wouldn't have popped out the other side of either high school or uni with the qualifications you had, eh? Have you ever had your IQ tested?
Yeah, I've had a couple of tests. I don't know if it's incredibly high. I think it's sort of high 140s or early 150s kind of thing.
Right.
But I mean, that's luck, right? It's the luck of the draw. And I'm incredibly grateful that I have a mind that can understand concepts relatively quickly, and I can remember concepts fairly well. I've got a very good, brain for general knowledge and stuff like that. Anyone who knows me will sort of attest to that. But I'm certainly not trying to be aggrandizing here, because it's luck. And that, because of that, I think that we need to be very aware of those traits that we have that allow us to succeed, and not be overly derisive of those people who maybe don't have those traits. Because, hey, a lot of what we have and what we're able to do is to some degree luck. It's a bit of a genetic lottery, or maybe it's a social lottery where we happen to be born into I was born in one of the safest countries on the planet with really good social support, and I've got a great family who have supported me through hard times, and I'm pretty clever.
You're already at the top of the pile.
And I'm a middle-aged white man, right? There's not much better advantage that I could have had. And so I'm not one of these people who sits back and says, well, everything I've got, I've built off the sweat of my own back. It's like, I've worked hard, but there's all these other things that have helped, and I'm not going to put someone else down who maybe hasn't had the same advantages.
Yeah. And so then you did, you're knee deep in doing your PhD, research, ketosis, all that. Well, and I'm sure you've spoken about that ad nauseum, so I don't really want to speak about that per se. But what I'd love to talk about ask you about is that arc between talking about that and being a sort of a resource for that topic, but sort of segueing into talking about what you spoke at Well Fed, which was not what I was expecting at all. And maybe I think we spoke about this offline, and maybe it's something that you're well versed in speaking about, and it's all very familiar to you. But it wasn't familiar to me. I was like, well, I know Cliff as the king of ketosis and nutrition science, so that's what he's going to talk about. But there wasn't any reference to any of that topic. In fact, it was about striving for, was it even happiness, or was it contentment?
I think...
Anyway, what I'm trying to say is, what is that arc going from, being an academic? Now, I'm sure you can talk about that if you're asked, but what you actually wanted to talk about was more sort of emotive and heartfelt sort of thing?
Yeah, so I really think that comes from having that inquisitive mind and being having that sense of discontentment, right? Dissatisfaction that I think we all have, and thinking about that at quite a young age. Like, why are we discontent? What is this sort of universal, in Buddhism they call it suffering, right? But it's actually more like discontentment. What's this universal discontentment that people have? And it's almost as if I got sidetracked at one point, because I got into health and nutrition, fitness, strength training, all that kind of stuff, because before I was the captain of the first 15, the coaches had said, look, you need to put on a lot of weight. I was a pretty skinny kid. They said, you got to put on a lot of weight. If you don't, you won't make the team. If you do, you'll captain the team. It's like, okay. So that kind of sidetracked me, because I started looking into the human body and I became fascinated about it. So I learned all that I could about the human body and about nutrition and strength training. And that gave me a passion for being originally a strength coach and nutritionist, and then eventually, much more in the nutrition field. But I also had that background in meditation and yoga and those other things. So I kind of incorporated those into my practice. But the epiphany actually came when I hit the wall. I must have been about 23 or 24, maybe a little bit older, maybe about 25, because I think at that stage I've been in practice. I started in practice really young while I was still a student practitioner. So I'd been in practice about 7 years. And I hit the wall. I was completely exhausted and I was frustrated and I didn't know why. I went over to my old man's place to talk to him about maybe how I could do my business a little bit better. Realized when I got over there, I wasn't there to talk about my business. I was there to talk about life. And I just burst into tears and said, mate, I'm done. I don't know what to do. And he said, you just need a break. He said, take some time, think about where you're at, where you want to go, where you want to be heading, all that kind of stuff. So I did. I took a break and I took about a year off. Maybe it was a bit longer. I spent probably 6 or 9 months of that in South America, just traipsing around. Spent a bit of time in Buenos Aires at the end in Argentina. And that's where I started writing my first book, right? My first book was supposed to be a nutrition book. But I couldn't get past this idea that it's not about so much nutrition. It's about what we want to achieve because of that. So I started writing a rambling sort of introduction, which included, goal setting and objectives and how we can really choose the life we want to be living. It's actually not a great book. I'm going to be straight up, because I was very young. It was a long time ago. But that became my first book, which had nothing to do with nutrition.
Doorstop, though.
What's that?
Makes for a good doorstop.
Yeah, exactly. I now use it. Yeah, I do. I now use it to. I've got a plug-in desk on my. A plug-in lamp on my desk, and that sort of buffers so it doesn't hurt the desk. Anyway, started writing this book. It became basically my first book, Choosing You, which was not about nutrition at all. It was about how we can choose to live the life we want to live. And that epiphany that was involved with writing that was basically that I was beginning to define myself, like most people do, as what I do. I'm a strength coach. I'm a nutritionist. This is what I do. But that led to all this frustration because that didn't recognize my why. So when I realized that, I started thinking, well, shit, this is not important so much. What's important is why I want to be doing this. So what is that? What does that actually look like? And so I started playing around just with a big piece of paper, brainstorming all these ideas of what I really want my best case life to be, what I really want to be doing. And there were some certain themes that kept coming up. Like I want to be experiential. So at the time, travel was really important to me. Being able to be of service to others was critically important. Educating, basically helping people to be happier was really important. And I realized that no matter what any of us do, we're actually helping people to be happier. If we look at it realistically, we're helping people to be happier. You train someone, let's say, and you help them to be fitter, stronger, whatever. It might be because they're an athlete and they want to achieve that goal. That's part of their life of happiness. So it's not about the training to be stronger. It's about helping them achieve their life of happiness. If we're working in retail and we're providing something of value to someone, that's because it's helping them to live their life of happiness. You know, again, I'll go back to an Ian Brooks story. He told me he was at speaking at an oil convention, and he said to them, "What do you sell?" Like, "Oil." "No, you don't." Like, "We sell oil." It's like, "No, what do you really sell?" It's like, "Boy, we sell oil." It's like, no, you don't. No one wants oil. No one wants to like get oil and pour it all over themselves and go, "Yeah, this is amazing." You know, no one wants to have oil. What they want to have is the petrol to put in their car to go on a trip with their family, or, you know, the petrol that allows them to go out for a fishing trip or whatever it happens to be, right? That's the outcome. So I really started to think about it in that sort of way. So now we're talking about probably 15 years later. This has really re-entered. It's always been there, but it's re-entered my sphere a lot more because I've gone through that process of being very heavily involved in research, you know, being very down in the numbers of nutrition and all that kind of stuff. And I'm really, it's like I'm getting back out there now amongst my clients and doing a lot more speaking and things, and recognizing that people have become so fixated on the idea of health. They're not always necessarily thinking about how their life can expand as a result of being healthy. In other words, they're seeing health as the goal, when in fact, health is the foundation by which you start to achieve the goals that are most important. You know, health isn't arbitrarily important. What's important is being healthy or whatever, so that you can feel great to spend time with your kids, or, you know, be more productive, be more effective, whatever.
The freedom and the luxury to do all the things that you want to do.
Yeah. And I think when we start to think about life in this way, it changes everything. Because even with some of the areas that I'm tangentially very interested in as a researcher and as a practitioner, like the decriminalization or legalization of cannabis, like the intelligent use of psychedelics, we often pigeonhole those into, okay, who can we treat? We can treat people with PTSD, and we can treat people who have severe intractable depression, all that kind of stuff. Absolutely. I'm fully in favor of that. And the evidence is beginning to be there, and we need to do more research, and all those various things are happening. But why don't we also talk about how can things like that, or meditation, or whatever it happens to be, not just help people to treat disorder, but maybe help people to think differently so that they can increase their human potential, and we start to act differently and have a different type of society where people are more interested in being happy and helping one another, rather than just being fixated on the mechanics of day-to-day life.
Yeah, right. You're quite the sage.
Because what else is there? You know, I think we don't put enough attention into how we as normal everyday people can increase our human potential, you know, because I think if you ask, I put this in my latest book, The Credo, that, you know, if you ask anyone what their ultimate goal is, it would probably be to be happy. You know, at the end of the day, people want to be happy. And a lot of people then say, well, that's naive, it's simplistic, you know, it doesn't actually mean anything. Well, sure, we could make a claim for any of those. But if you ask someone, they want to be happy. And most people know what it feels like to be at times in their life when they are happy, content, present, you know, aware of the world around them, being actually more comfortable within their own skin and in their environment.
And so the people come to you, so a new client would come to you as a practicing naturopath, dietitian, nutritionist, but then your methodology or your recommendations are sort of probably not what they're expecting. Do you get clients that are sort of taken aback, or how does that apply to, you know, what I came in here for, kind of thing?
Yeah, I think, well, there are two aspects of that. I am most well known for, I guess, my work in the sort of carb appropriate, low carb, ketogenic space. But as a practitioner, I've always worked as a naturopath, nutritionist, and mind body practitioner, right? I know mind body sounds a little bit woo, but I've always used modalities and trained in various modalities ever since I was, relatively young, right through 20s and 30s. A lot of people don't realize I did my early postgrad in mind body healthcare at AUT. So this is a legitimate university where we're studying the concepts of basically mind and body medicine, because that's really important. So in practice, I've always done that. And I just see it as being a truly evidence-based but holistic approach. I can't in good conscience speak with someone just about nutrition when, maybe their sleep patterns are terrible. And maybe they could benefit from, living a more mindful life, and maybe they're on Facebook 11 hours a day. All of those things are worth discussing. But also outside of those things, because they're also the mechanics of health, right? It's also very much about working with people to help them understand what their why is and whether the way they're living is conducive to that. Now, there's a really good benefit in that, because once someone starts to see the real end goal as compared to what they thought the end goal was, it actually makes the mechanics easier, because it's far more compelling when they start to really connect to that life they could be living, to be able to do the things in the moment that make it a reality.
You got more sort of motivation to get to that.
Absolutely. Because if you're just doing the things now because you feel you should,
yeah,
you're going to do that for a couple of weeks, and then you're going to be back to, eating Doritos and gaming all night.
Yeah.
Not there's anything wrong with it if that's what you want to do.
Is that wrong?
There's no wrongs or rights.
Yeah.
There's what works.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But that's, and it'll help people get off that sort of cyclical kind of yo-yo thing, where they jump on a diet or a program or follow a particular protocol because the motivation isn't from the right source. Yeah.
Yeah, and it also speaks to, what we were talking about before, with this compulsion to have it now, right? When we are actually aware of how health happiness into happiness can eventuate over the long term, we realize that we're actually battling against our instincts. Because in a natural setting, anything that we would want to achieve, for example, let's say you and I want to achieve certain things in business, right? So we're thinking about that. We've set the goal. We're projecting towards it. But intrinsically, our body and mind want it now. Why? Because anything that we would desire in a natural setting, we would be working towards getting right now. Like, you're hungry, hunt and gather. You're tired, sleep. You want to copulate, go and do that. And you're going to do it. You're going to find it, do it. You're going to basically get it done right away. We don't have that luxury nowadays, because a lot of the things that we want to achieve, like financial security, that might take many years.
Yeah.
But the compulsion underneath what we're doing right now is, no, don't sleep. Don't cut your workday short. Do it now.
Yeah, which only leads to kind of frustration and dissatisfaction, because it's a long game, right?
Yep. Leads to dissatisfaction, burnout, and it also leads to, I believe, poorer results.
And shingles.
And shingles, exactly. Well, I actually had a realization, it was probably a year, 18 months ago. I think I might have actually talked to you about it, but I had fallen back into a trap, which I have at various times, of just pushing way too hard, working too long, not taking breaks when I needed to, all those things that we fall into the trap of doing. I had to take a step back and say, well, look, I'm a scientist. At the end of the day, I'm a scientist, right? It's what I do most of the day, is look at scientific papers and do all that nerdy shit, right? If I'm doing that, how can I in good conscience be working 50, 60, 70 plus hours a week? Because I know from having read the research that is actually driving down my productivity. So I'm going to go back to the research and take an inductive approach to it and look at all the papers that have been written on this and, reaffirm to myself what I already know, that working a certain amount of hours in a week is not just more productive per hour, but it's probably in the long term more productive overall. And what's that number? We don't know exactly, but it's somewhere probably between 30 and 50 hours, most likely closer to 30, right?
Yeah.
So if people are working around 30, 35 hours a week, that should be more than ample. You know, how does that translate into a day? Well, to me, that basically means, you know, no more than 7 hours of work time in any given day.
Mm.
And so now I limit that. So I know that I train for an hour every day. So when I start my day, I know that 8 hours later, because I've taken an hour out to train, that's when I have to switch off.
Mm.
And having those rules for myself, those structures has helped me to get back to being a bit calmer, happier, you know, a better person for Bella and others to be around.
I wonder how that'll play out now that with this sort of everyone working at home and they can manage their time
It's
more
really,
independently.
yeah.
It might transpire that they're more productive in their day than rather than getting to the office by 8:30 and staying there till 7 or 8, because there's this sort of, I'm sure in those big companies, there's almost like a culture of the more time you're at your desk, the more work you're going to get done, the more productivity, blah, blah, blah. But to your point, that's not.
Yeah, and that's why I think people need to be very aware of that now. If the way we work does shift even subtly, we want for that to obviously be a positive thing, right? So we want for there to be maybe that little bit more freedom where we can take some breaks. We can get outside instead of just being stuck inside our office all day, you know, even if it's just into the garden to get some sun or whatever.
Mm.
What we don't want it to do is, because we're working from home now, for that to mean that we're perpetually at work, which a lot of people struggle with when they work from home. Because like, you know, let's say you've set up a little office. I could just go into the office and get this finished.
Mm.
Probably not a good idea. You know, we need to have those times where we are on and the times when we're off. Any athlete knows that. You enter the zone, you exit the zone. You can't be in the zone all the time. If you're in the zone all the time, you burn out and you don't perform.
So do you have parameters around that yourself? Because obviously there's a temptation, because you've got all these businesses that directly feed you.
Yep.
There must be a temptation to keep kind of pushing all those forward outside of your typical working day. So are you able to harness that at all and say, right, actually, for my mindset, for my interaction with my, you know, with Bella and my family and stuff, I'm gonna, from 6 o'clock till 8 in the morning, it's devices off. How disciplined I am.
Pretty much. I mean, I think I'm fairly disciplined. We don't work in the weekends, for example. We do, you know, get to a point every day. And like I say, it's generally, you know, around that 8 hours after having started, we'll just basically stop. That's it. And no going back, you know, into any work stuff. We've probably fallen into the same habits that a lot of people have in the last few weeks of checking our phones a bit more, because we want to know what's going on. You know, we want to be checking the news around this thing, but typically we're pretty good about, you know, turning our phones off or putting them away. We certainly put them away for the night. You know, we don't have them by our beds or anything. And so I think all of those habits are really important. They're things that we do. Of course, I don't want to be, you know, absolutist about this either, or, you know, this sort of utopian idea, because sometimes we all know as business people that we have to get shit done. So sometimes you have to have a long day, right? But it's more so the consistency where you don't have to do that, which is, let's face it, the vast majority of the time, you do have those bounds where you say, you know what, that's enough for today. One thing that I think happens for a lot of people is, and myself included, you get to a point in the day anyway when you're done. You're actually done. You can't do much more, but you feel you should. And that's what I call it. I put it in a couple of my books, actually, that I call it the send and receive mentality. I'm going to sit in front of my computer and I'm brain dead, so I can't actually do anything productive, but I might sit there in front of my emails, like basically pushing send and receive, hoping something will happen, because then I feel productive because I'm still at work.
Yeah, I do that.
Yeah, and I think you'll probably agree, it's not the most productive thing to be doing with your day.
Although, no, yeah, I'm guilty of that, because you're waiting for an opportunity, you're waiting for, yeah, it's not a productive state to be in. But yeah, I've just sort of been into the last couple of weeks, and I'm getting better at it. Kind of kept falling off the wagon, but not checking my phone for work or any not picking up my phone until 8:30.
Yeah.
Have no notifications coming through. Because of what I was doing before I got out of bed, I've checked emails, I've checked WhatsApp messages from work colleagues, and that just slipstreams you straight into that mentality, stress-inducing kind of zone before I've even said good morning to Till and picked up Tim. So I've noticed a change in my mood. You know, I'm appreciating the sunrise and having that coffee with no other sort of distractions other than Matilda and Zan. It's a small thing to do, and 8:30 is not late in the day to start work anyway. Do you know what I mean? It's a great time to start. Whereas I'm starting, typically I would, wake up at 6 and do all the, emailing at 6 in the morning. It's like, forget that. Wait a couple of hours, enjoy the beauty of the morning and spend time with your family, then crack into it.
Yeah, we do a very similar thing. We, every morning we get up, have a coffee together. We do admittedly read the news, but we often, we'll end up having a big discussion about something. I do the same thing. I don't want to be on social or emails first thing in the morning, because then I'm thinking of sort of being distracted by other things. After we've had that coffee and had a bit of a chat and whatnot and got into our work days, the first thing I do every single day, there's only the very odd exception, but it's so rare as to be, a really rare exception. Every single day first thing I do is create content, whether that's writing towards a new book or writing articles, writing course content. It's always something that's bubbling up, right? So I do that for a couple of hours, then I check my emails. And I basically try and batch communication. So I literally open up Gmail, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. I go through and clear all my notifications, bang, 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 from all of them, and then I'm done. Then I go and train, eat lunch, then come back into work again in the afternoon. I work from home, so it's easy to do, and I train at home as well. And then in the afternoon, I'm typically doing creative type stuff, business planning, strategies, our marketing, all that kind of stuff. I'm working on that with Bella and the rest of the team. And then again, I'll probably check my emails and social, do all my communications once more in the day. So it's only twice a day.
That's very good.
And by batching communication like that, you end up being way more effective. And there's research to show that as well. I recently wrote a series of 3 articles about the effect of media, social media and advertising on our health. And I talked about a lot of the research that shows some of these negative effects and how we can mitigate it. Because let's face it, email and social, that kind of stuff is incredibly beneficial for our lives. But if we overuse it, then it does become detrimental like anything else. So how do we minimize the harms while maximizing the benefits and continuing within that to have a more mindful life? And I think it's more than achievable for most people.
Well, Cliff, speaking of technology, I just want to flag that I'm on 2% battery. I think that's probably a good, safe place to stop.
Well, it was very draining for the technology. I think it was probably not so draining for us. Hopefully it was more inspiring than draining.
Yeah, well, I know you're a very busy man, so thanks for your time, Cliff.
Thanks, bud. It's always a pleasure.
All right, take it easy.
Yes, man.